Welcome to the two-way Procast, and for you guys, welcome to the Kime podcast. What do you guys call it?
Yeah, Kimecast.
Kimecast. Nice. Very cool.
Jake.
Today we have Russ and Tony, we never really do this. It's always just you guys listening to, it's always you guys listening to Nolan and I talk about nonsense. But today is actually not going to be nonsense. Today is going to be a little more educational and informative, and maybe sprinkled with some nonsense in there. And if you release this to your listeners at Kime,
we apologize.
We apologize in advance because we're idiots and they're not. So, what kind of sparked doing this? First of all, we're friends, so I know them.
Well,
they're
first, would you guys like to do your introductions for those who don't know you?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Go for it, Tone.
No, I was gonna introduce them how I knew them.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, because sometimes it's more flattering that way.
Yeah. Friend and dad first.
Yeah.
And then physical
Friend
therapist.
and dad, husband, physical therapist.
Sorry to
second.
take that away from you.
No, go ahead, please.
All right, I'm Tony Mikla, physical therapist and strength coach, performance coach. So I've been doing this for almost 20 years, probably 25 years of coaching. So working with the variety of the community, from athletes to tactical special forces. I had a good opportunity to work a lot with some special ops groups for a couple of years at one of our locations that we had in Phoenix. So yeah, when meeting Jake and talking about this stuff is like really cool to like, how can we bring some fitness aspects, some rehabilitative aspects to what you guys do and into the community?
Yeah, it's Russ Dunning, been with Tony for the last 10 years. We started this company to really kind of gear towards sports medicine, how it should be done. Really trying to pair health and elite level fitness, not just like your recreational weekend warrior. We really wanted to kind of see if we can do it at an elite level and what that looks like. So our model is quite different. Our education system is quite different. And we're pretty, we're quite fierce in what we do in terms of the communities that we help. So we help with every sport in the area. We help with a lot of law enforcement and fire. Tony has a huge background with working with the SEALs. I worked with a lot of the pro fight team down in Sacramento. So Uriah Faber and all of his group down there that train with hand-to-hand combat in the octagon. So it's pretty awesome helping with those guys and what they're able to push their bodies through. But we're passionate about science, and we're passionate about helping people move better. So it's kind of the essence of what we do.
Awesome. Cool. And for those of you in the Kimecast that don't know who we are, Nolan he's got a background in martial arts. I've got a background in, building a business in the tactical industry and the military. We are Second Amendment proponents. We believe that we should all be prepared and we should train, and our freedoms are protected through the Second Amendment. That is kind of our value, and that's what we typically do our podcasts about, somewhere in that nature. But with all of that with training comes physicality and health and well-being and endurance and stamina. And that's why I think this is kind of a good segue to kind of get started into, specific. One of the questions that I had, unless there's something else you wanted to cover before we got started, one of the questions that I had was, what type of activities did you cover for some of the elite special operations guys with the SEALs? What would you do and focus on so that they could better perform at their job?
Yeah, so this is actually super fun. When I got to work with the team, what would usually happen is we'd have a team would come in and train with us for a 2-week window. So they'd be on an op, or they'd be training out in the East Coast, wherever it might be, and they'd come in, and we'd have them for a full 2 weeks. So we'd do assessments on their body, we'd do nutritional assessments, we'd do fitness assessments, we'd do any kind of injury assessments and such. And these guys certainly don't admit to being hurt, and so they don't believe that they're hurt. So the screening process is pretty in-depth to be like, all right, here comes a guy, let's learn as much as we can about him in an hour and a half, and then give him a program over the next 2 weeks to continue to foster his improvement so he could serve. So that was really the objective of it. What I thought going into it, working with special forces, I was like, okay, these guys are going to be athletes. So it was a professional athlete training facility. So we had pro athletes in every sport you could think of. So working with the military, special forces seemed no different. So my head was like, all right, I'm gonna have these like 6'2" to 6'6" like guys that were in the played football, that were just beasts, everybody's jacked, and then these guys come walking in. I'm like, where's the team at? Where's the SEAL team? Are these the coaches? So it was really, really interesting. So a variety of spectrums of body type, everything from the average go-lucky male to the more elite athlete. You saw a full spectrum.
Notice how he pointed at you and he said average.
I didn't want to bring that up, but my feelings got hurt just a little
He's
bit.
crying inside.
So it was really interesting. And then working with them, my thought too was like, okay, this is going to be really high intense stuff. Like they're going to be, sprinting, jumping over walls, crawls, like hand to hand combat, like these situations. And
Movie stuff.
Yeah, movie
Steven
stuff.
Seagal. They're all Steven Seagal.
All Steven Seagal, right?
Before he put on the weight.
That was exactly it. So and then as I started working with them, they're like, dude, if that's what we end up in, shit really hit the fan. Like that might be 30 seconds to 2 minutes of work and it's over. And if it's not over, we're in deep shit. But what precursors that is that I have to like get dropped off and then hike for 16 hours with 60 to 80 pounds on my back, not sleep for 3 or 4 nights, and then end up perform the op and then get back out. So the real art was sustaining the rucking, sustaining the hiking, the weight on the back, the limitations in food, water, all the things that make it difficult to operate. So it was super, super interesting. So as we started looking at, problems or training, a lot of it came down to endurance, a lot of it came down to the body, how does their back hold up, how their hips hold up, feet, of course, is a big deal. And then, of course, you'd have some shoulder or extremity issues, like based on like being on the ground and having to crawl or having to stay in more hidden, confined environments and such to stay out of view. That was what was surprising to me about the process was I thought, man, it's going to be like all this athletic stuff. And then it's like, it's actually much less about that. Versus when you train an athlete for sports, it's so much about all of that being elusive to the enemy, but or the competition. But in the military, it's very much so like don't get seen, and do work really, really hard to avoid being seen or witnessed, and that usually means doing things for long periods of time.
Right. Very quietly.
Yeah.
And under the radar.
Yes.
Right. When they came into your training facility, did they fast rope in via helicopter? Or did they just run and walk through the front door?
Yeah.
Just imagine they just halo jump into your gym.
Well, the best part about a couple of things was they'd come in and they'd be, you couldn't really recognize everybody had full beards, everything. Yeah. So definitely special ops groups. They certainly worked together and knew each other, but all the names were not real, and then wherever they were from was the East Coast.
I was from the East Coast.
Very non-specific. So that was always pretty fun. And what jobs they had, they're pretty discreet about as well. So it's very, very protected group, like fully functioning. What was interesting is they all came from different walks, whether it be Air Force or the Navy or different branches, to come together to form these elite teams was really cool. Super interesting. The thing we worked on was how to make them better tactical athletes. So a lot of times they'd come in and first day they're like, oh, nothing's hurt. And then of course we'd screen them and we'd say like, turns out like you can't dorsiflex your foot at all, which means you can't like bring it up so you couldn't possibly run as fast as you should be able to. Or that's going to give you huge trouble in walking. Does it bother you? And then, these are tough dudes, right? They're like, that's the whole point of this special ops groups is like they never quit. If you have a problem like that, it's going to be very hard for you to operate. And they'd be like, well, yeah, it is, but it doesn't, it's fine.
It's fine.
It's fine.
I'm like, yeah, but you're here for us for 2 weeks. Like, let me make it better.
Yeah.
And then you can operate better and it would be easier for you. So that was always.
This is your place to complain.
Say something negative.
It's a safe place.
Yeah.
Don't worry. No one's going to clap.
No,
They're of the brand of, it's the old adage, scared. Hell yeah, I was scared. Scared I'd run out of Taliban. You know what I mean? They're just, it's a different breed for sure.
But yeah, that was super fun. So then when we trained them, we'd focus on improving their performance and basically look at the deficits, find what might be the weakest link, which they certainly did not want to disclose. But we'd test it out and determine it, and then have good conversation about, hey, this is what we can work on over the next 2 weeks. What do you want to accomplish? What can we teach you? And it was always super, super cool from either nutrition standpoint or just their mobility standpoint, or usually strength, power. Give them a good program they can continue to do. It's amazing, and I won't say unsupported in a negative way, but how unsupported they are in what they do. Which is once again is the definition of the group, right? It's very, very independent, can be anywhere in the world and function.
Right.
Don't need a lot of support, but it's amazing how little tools they had in this space and how much we were able to impact them in that period.
When they gave you their nutrition protocol, was it kind of all the same answer, just MREs? Enchilada,
Yeah.
MREs.
Pretty much. Yeah. Pretty much.
All enchilada MREs.
Yeah.
Jambalaya. They just start
not,
naming the MREs.
Totally.
The
Yeah. There's
jambalaya,
not a
enchilada.
lot of healthy food option choices. That was very, very limited.
But did they actually have some sort of like nutrition regimen in general, or was it kind of all over the place?
For the most, all over the place for the most part. There was very, very few. They were all very conscious and aware, and when they were stateside, they were much cleaner about what they were doing as best they could be, versus when they were deployed. So they're very, as you know, like very focused on training. Like how do I train? How do I maximize my body, get the most out of it, and then, they do the best they can when they're deployed. But
Yeah, I mean, sometimes your only option is to eat the local food.
Yeah.
Really, like it's just that like you gotta eat the goat, so you eat the goat.
a lot of things we talked about was like frequency of food. So like when to eat and when not to eat and how much to do at these different times so you fuel your body more effectively depending on what you're doing.
Right.
So that's a big deal, like, because it's one thing to be what you eat, it's a big deal, but then the timeliness of when you eat it can have a huge impact as well on performance.
I noticed that a lot of the special operations guys, every time you see them, they're all kind of built the same. Traps
They have a look.
for days. There's a look. They've all got traps, right? There's always these big chunky traps up here. Biceps, obviously, and big chunky legs.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of walking and a lot of carrying. And I'm assuming a lot of push-ups because they're in the military. Most guys in the military have traps. Did you notice kind of the same thing when they were all in, that they all had pretty much the same body type? If you were to,
It did. Like for the most part, there wasn't any like really big, like super strong, like diesel to Howard dudes that you would expect to see. But you did see a lot of a lot of track, a lot of arm development for sure. Big legs. I mean, from the walks and stuff, I would assume, or that's the way they were built.
Yep.
And then their workout regimes are still very historically classic military, like they're doing pull-ups, they're doing push-ups, they're doing sit-ups, they're doing basic things. I got a chance to go special forces at the Air Force and witness like them going through a workout at one of their stations, and that's what it was a lot of, lots of
body exercise,
just
body weight.
body weight stuff. They'd lift some weights, but it wasn't like that wasn't the focus because putting on extra weight isn't necessarily helpful.
Right. Yep.
In that environment, right?
We've seen it happen. We've seen it happen to athletes, basketball players. You'll be like, man, that dude's getting big, and he's also not as good.
Yeah, slowing
not
down.
as fast, and he's slowing down, and it's
Well, when you do 10,000 repetitions of one single movement, you tend to get stiff. The body prefers to be tight to support that activity over and over and over.
Got it.
So, I think there's always like, is it helping the short run with being able to handle a lot of gear and walk for 20 miles or 50 miles, whatever it is? But what's the long run? 20 years later, how are you suffering from, those 10 million repetitions? So that's the threat. The threat is good old-fashioned shoulder pain, back pain.
So general preparedness for just anybody listening, if they're concerned about, hey, one day shit may hit the fan, and I want to be able to be prepared. I wanted to be able to be in the best shape possible. Are you recommending more of kind of a myriad of exercises, more of kind of a well-rounded workout plan, rather than just do this one thing over and over and over?
Well, I think most people in this mental space are not in their 20s. When you're in your 20s, you have the luxury of your joints have all the youth in the world. You've got vitality and strength and speed. You don't have to train that hard. You just have to do athletic things, and you have it.
Yeah. And you're optimistic about the world.
That's right. You're optimistic. And as you gain some wisdom, you start realizing, oh shit, this all could be taken from me. So it's usually people who've had a little more age to them in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And so for those people, we tend to have collected enough problems that if you're not spending at least like 20 or 30% of your workout actually improving on how you move, the depth of your joint movement, your tissue opening, can your arm get overhead? Can your hand touch the middle of your back? Can your heel get to your butt? A lot of people can't do that. And they don't realize that if your heel can't get to your butt, you might blow out your disc in the near future. And that would stop you in a hurry if Armageddon came. All of a sudden you're aiming, my back!
No, dude,
because,
I'm a warrior. I'll never quit.
That's right. Until
Those who have never slipped a disc.
Yeah, exactly. Then you realize, like, I think I'll sooner die. Boop.
Yep.
Can we talk a little bit about nutrition? I want to talk about the journey that I just kind of went on over this last week, which I fasted from Sunday to Saturday. My wife, you both know my wife. It's hard to not eat around her. So I did eat some, we went out to a Japanese restaurant. I had a couple pieces of yellowtail here and there, but for the most part, I kept food out. I did the bone broth thing, and I felt great. In fact, when you and I podcasted last week, I felt like I had more mental acuity, and I was a little more focused. My memory seemed a little bit sharper. I actually had some pretty good workouts. Some days I didn't though. Some days I was dragging ass. I knew that my body was just pulling from its actual fat stores to get the energy. What is your opinion on fasting and in that one particular thing, not nutrition overall, it's a big topic, but do you think it would be smart, especially for guys that are in special operations, if the shit ever hit the fan, right? Do you stuff your face with a bunch of stuff? Right, and get that fat storage
like
going,
a bear. Are you going in for hibernation?
Put as much in as you possibly can, or I would think that the reason why I felt I had so much energy, and even outside of the science, right, like outside of the detailed science of like your body going into ketosis and doing all these things, I would assume why I had so much energy is because it is my hypothesis that anthropologically, you hunt when you're hungry, and when you hunt, you have to kind of be on the top of your game. You need the energy, you need the mental awareness, you need that focus. So what are your thoughts on that? Would you eat a big meal before going out if shit hit the fan, just so you're well fed before you go, or do you think being in that fasted state is more beneficial?
I think fasted state for sure is probably better. I mean, even if you're looking at an athlete, like a pregame meal is a conversation. And for years, the recommendation has been like at least 4 hours in advance. So you certainly don't want to eat like right before you go.
Okay.
Yeah. So which is a decent amount, and usually you're not eating a lot. You're eating something more carbohydrate rich and stuff. But no, what you speak of is real. And Russ can talk more about the science of this and kind of dive deep without getting too crazy. But when you're burning fat, you're getting so much more energy for your metabolism. Like, it's unbelievable. Like, you have to be able to use oxygen to do it at the same time. But if you do those two things together, the quality of the energy gets insane.
Yeah, I think it's two parts. I think you get the autophagy of the cell, which means that the cell gets into a state where it might actually degrade a lot of the bad parts of the cell. So your body always wants to degrade the bad parts of the mitochondria, the bad parts of the organelle, and that's what stress does. Stress helps fortify our body, much like a sword that's being pounded. You heat the sword, you pound the sword, you pound the impurities out of the sword. Mm-hmm. We do the same thing with stress. So when you stress the system, you're trying to purify the system. You're trying to weed out the bad shit in your cell. So when you actually go into fasting state, that's what happens. It's exercise for your cells, similar to actual exercise. So fasting is just as much of a digestive exercise as push-ups are for your pec muscles, as meditation can be for your brain. So these are all exercises to stimulate change. And on that front, I'd say like fasting does two things all at once. One, it teaches your brain how to have that willpower of, I'm not going to have that Oreo. I'm not going to have my wife's fried chicken. I'm not going to have that noodle, although it looks good.
You're going a little too far there.
That's it.
Can't
Can't
commit. Crossing the line.
And the other half is the science. I think the science is super well founded. Peter Attia speaks to this immensely in all of his work. So read Peter Attia's book. If you want to understand the science, but I think it's powerful. I think 2 to 3 days is a great thing for everyone to do. Mm-hmm. I think a week is a strong effort.
For sure. Yeah, it was 2 days on 2 days with water and just water and coffee, and then the rest of the days was bone broth, and then hamachi. What's the sashimi? It was sashimi one of the days. Yeah, just kind of pure protein.
Light protein. So I've got a question going into this on SF and then on fighters.
Before you do that,
damn it.
I'm not gonna. What I want to do is halfway through this.
I'm quiet for the rest of the cast.
No, hold that.
No more talking.
I'm sorry. I want to this far into it. If you guys that are part of the 2A Procast like what you hear, I would like you to be able to have them find you so that they could listen to more of what you're saying.
So we're through, we have YouTube and then, of course, Spotify, Apple. It's all available there, and it's through Kimecast.
Kimecast, cool, and we'll put the link in the description. Go ahead.
Sounds good. So this comes from the Discord itself, but I think it's a really good question. You guys are very much into longevity, right? You were talking about being able to touch your heel to your butt and not blowing out your discs. So with the SF guys and then to the fighters, what is one of the more non-combat related injuries that you see these guys face? So outside of actually war fighting and outside of getting in the ring and hitting each other in the head, what are the most common injuries that you guys are seeing and the preventative measures for that?
Yeah, I think when you use your body a lot, whether it's with rucking or with sports or it's with training, there's certain areas of the body that tend to get rubbed together excessively. So that'd be the meniscus tissue, the labrum in your hip, the labrum in your shoulder. So when you have those deep tissues, if you don't move well through, oddly enough, it's the areas above and below that spot. So if we're talking about knee issues, Meniscus issues are very common for people who involve themselves in a lot of sports. If your ankle and hip don't move well, you will grind on that meniscus excessively. Think of that meniscus kind of like a tire. You will wear down that rubber quicker, and if you do that excessively, then you start having cartilage damage, then you sign up for the next knee replacement. So that can happen if things don't move well above and below. The same thing can be said for the low back. The same thing can be said for the shoulder. So we tend to see, the typical sports injuries would be knee issues, hip issues, back pain, and shoulder pain. Mm-hmm. You get those because you're using your knees and your hips and your back a lot, and then you tend to be, push-ups and pull-ups, or you're striking, or you're fighting, or you're holding up, whether it's like a bow and arrow or a gun, and you get this bicep tendonitis. You get the medial meniscus knee pain. Mm-hmm. You get the lower back ache whenever you hike for 5 miles with a backpack on, and that usually happens for most people that have good muscle. That happens because of mobility deficits. And said very clearly to everyone that's listening, unless you've been trained how to expose your mobility problem, most people don't know that they move like shit. Most people don't know that they move like shit. I couldn't say that more than enough. They don't know it, and then all of a sudden they do a test and like, shit, I didn't know I couldn't get that deep. I didn't know my heel couldn't get to my butt. Of course you don't know. Right. The body's built to compensate.
I think just to add to that, it happens both like especially for the tactical athletes, so whether it be in combat training, whatever, even if it's police, fire, same situation. If you're wearing the vest or you're wearing the belt or both, some combination of this, it basically makes most of your structure pretty rigid up top, right? So it kind of limits some of your mobility, to Russ's point. So what that does is we're already built like that by nature, where your rib cage is very, very stable and it's a stiff area. Your shoulder is the most mobile joint in the body. Well, if you limit the rib cage even more by putting a vest on and such, which is necessary, but now the shoulder, if you have to reach up and get something or reach overhead or lift something, is really in a bad situation. Mm-hmm. It's really doesn't have any supportive structures, because everything's so stable. It has to move more than it's used to or work harder than it's used to, which creates overuse problems, right? The same thing is true for the low back. If you wear the vest and you're super stiff up top and you're sitting in a squad car all day, or you're rucking for several hours, or that's just how you're training, you're going to get really stiff to that. And then when you go to move, your low back is going to have to move a lot because your rib cage doesn't move at all, or because your hips are so stiff from wearing the belt all the time.
Right.
And that makes it very vulnerable. So then you see the disc probably gets blown a little out of proportion as far as disc problems, but you definitely see more low back pain. So shoulders, low back pain, knee would be the biggest, and then hip is right following. And then, of course, you get the foot stuff, mostly, again, due to probably heavier weight and load from carrying equipment.
But we all get wear and tear in their body. It's just those who compensate more aggressively, they tend to wear and tear a lot quicker.
Do you have a workout regimen set up primarily for guys in the tactical industry already? Do you have some ideas of what anybody listening could be able to do to kind of improve their performance on a dynamic range or moving through a tactical environment or CQB, or be able to kind of bring that heart rate down a little bit when they get moving so that they take a better shot after they get to their point to which they need to take that shot?
Yeah, we have an entire program all laid out for it.
That's a segue into what we're about to talk about.
Plug it.
Let me take the first part of that, and then you can talk about the conditioning aspect. But so I think whenever you look at movement, we break it down into a few categories. So the first is mobility. Can they get into the position they need to get into? So if they're in a crouch position, or if they're in a prone position on their elbows, or if they're in a standing position, can they get in the position you want them to be in? Do they have the mobility possible? So that's number one. And there's tests you can do that we can teach you to do on yourself, that you can say, like, yes, check, I'm good, or I'm not. And if you're not, you really have to do that first. That's like the lowest hanging fruit. And then there comes the strength component. Are you strong enough to move your body? Can you move your own body? And then can you move it plus gear in the way that you want to? Can you get up and down from the crouch, from a crouch position with your gear on, with the extra weight, with comfort? Or you're kind of like wobbly? Is your knee giving out halfway up? Or is your quad like on fire just to do a few reps? Or is it easy for you to pop up and down, to get down and go into a roll, or to get up, sprint, change position, get down in a crouch again? So those would be like, can you physically move, would be the first aspect of that question. And yes, you want to screen and test those things, find out what you're not so good at, and then make that a training regimen. And yes, we have that. So what we do is test the client to be like, what are you good at? What are you not so good at? And we're going to say, let's work on the things you're not so good at. So we really raise the bar, raise the foundation to a better level. And then sky's the limit where you go from there. Improvement's easy. I think about training in a way like people want to train to improve a lot, let's say 50% or 30%, they want to get 30% better. It's hard to get 10% better. Like it's a ridiculous amount of work to get 10% better. But if you can't move or if you get hurt, you have 100% loss.
Right.
Yeah. So it's about
That's a good point.
Prevent the loss. Like, let's be protective there, and let's make sure we at least own where we are, and let's see if we can't get 5, 10, 15% better. And I mean, the potential is out through the roof.
Yeah, we tell a lot of people is they all want to get faster, more powerful, and we say go and put your foot off the brakes, then you're going to go faster.
Yeah, right.
And the brakes are tissue restriction, poor joint mobility, poor movement health, poor motor control, poor coordination, and that tends to happen with age, tends to happen after an injury, after a surgery, after even a pain pattern will inhibit you in a certain way. So those are the things to be mindful of and restore first. And then as you move better and get stronger, we start having a lot more fun with conditioning. And conditioning can really happen with really kind of getting a smart sweat on. So when you think about like having a good sweat experience, whether it's with a kettlebell, dumbbell, even a barbell to some degree, but I'd be careful with there. But even just like good old-fashioned calisthenics, by modulating your work-to-rest ratio, you can kind of make a program really change. We can have a single movement pattern or 2 movement patterns with the kettlebell, and if you change the work-to-rest ratio, you can change it from an extremely anaerobic glycolytic experience, which means like we're about to throw up type experience, or you can elongate it to a 45-minute session that dances between a lactic work, which is a very short burst activity, and followed by an aerobic recovery. And so depending on what style of workout you want to do, and that we can teach that of what's your game plan. But in reality, the broader your aerobic base, i.e. stamina, and the more powerful you can be in a moment, think of that as like your 7-second burst. When you operate with those extremes, you can achieve both. You can have speed and power in the moment, and you can go the distance and have stamina. You can have your cake and eat it too with smart training, but that looks very different than CrossFit style, AMRAP, I'm gonna go balls to the wall for 20 minutes and be done with it. It's not that type of training system. In reality, that type of training system, you'll get more fit in a hurry until you get injured. That's why CrossFit athletes are 25 years old.
Right.
Interesting.
Well, yeah, we teach that, yeah.
So when you get to that point where you want to vomit, where you want to throw up, you're in a healthy state?
Yeah, you're
at that point. This is a legitimate question because I've always wanted this. I'm like when I've worked out to the point where I wanted to vomit, and I'm like, this can't be good for me if my body wants to throw up. In the end, it is good for you.
It's an extremely sympathetic response. So you basically it's doing a full test. You're seeing how much work can I do in a 5 to 8 minute period. And your body says, well, I'm kind of done. So it spews out all of your guts because it doesn't want anything in your stomach or small intestines in that space because you're basically sending all of your blood to your muscles and there's no room.
There's no more room
to do anything. So it's like, oh, let's just get that out of there. That way I can keep going. And all I care about is muscles. So it's a great test, but it's not great training. So you would do that whenever you wanted to peak for something. For instance, for like every pro fighter I know, they only do that type of training about 4 weeks preparing for a fight. If they do 12 weeks before a fight, they're going to hurt themselves.
Okay.
Yeah, so the body can adapt to that stress in a short window, and you will get in phenomenal shape, but you will peak. It's a fairly high peak. And so we really don't promote that much training like that because unless you think Armageddon is in 2 weeks. Yeah. and then we might have a reason for it.
Yeah. So what's happening when that happens, like one of the reasons why the body's doing that is it's trying to get acid out of the body as well. So not only the food and stuff, but it's trying to decrease your acidic level. So it's changing your pH. So when you work out at a super high intensity, like an AMRAP, you're producing blood lactate, which is acidic in nature. And so as that's happening, it's overcoming. And then so your body's got to get rid of it somehow. So vomiting's the best option it has.
Okay.
So it's induced for a reason. But it goes back to like when we train, like you train the MMA guys, we were talking about this the other day. It's the same concept where it's very hard for someone to sustainably work that hard for 3, 4, 5 minutes. And these rounds are 5-minute rounds now. So the art of it is, can you go super hard for 30 seconds? And then can you get yourself a break, breathe a little bit, get out of that state, change your metabolism, and then whoever can recover the fastest usually ends up winning. So within that 5 minutes. But no one can go hard all out for 5 minutes. It's not possible. And the same thing be true no matter how much you train. There's a wall. They say hitting the wall, right? There's a wall, and that wall lives usually around 2 to 3 minutes. Like if you're all in balls to the wall, maybe 2 minutes. And if you're really well trained, you might be able to get 3 out of it. But other than that, you're probably vomiting.
Yeah.
And then you're not. And then you're no longer beneficial to your team, nor are you safe. Because now you're just taking care of yourself.
Right.
Said something really interesting when we were talking before the podcast about, let's say you're not good at getting up and down, right? You really want to be able to take some shots, move on to the next point of cover, get down in the prone really quickly. To train for that, a normal human being me, well, I'm not normal by any means, but a layman, I guess you could say, would assume that, as I would, I'm going to have to do that thing over and over. I'm going to have to run from this point of cover to that point of cover and get up and down and then do it again and do it again. But what you were telling me before the podcast is like, no, like if you want to increase your vertical jump, you do what, not specifically for your vertical jump, but you would work on what?
Yeah, we expose your limiting factor. So say for this person, if your hips don't extend well or you don't have good knee range of motion, then you're going to keep doing that activity and keep suffering. You're basically to be stuck in the sand. You can do that activity 1,000 times in the next 3 weeks and still have marginal gains because you have a tissue restriction or you're unstable in a segment.
Got it.
And because your body's cheating, it's compensating. And like I said, unless you're the perfect 22-year-old without a single problem, then most people can't just do the test and get better at the test.
By practicing the test over
That
and over,
works
yeah.
when you're a kid.
I miss
That
being
does
that
not,
young.
That does not work with a 43-year-old.
Yeah.
You have to be smarter. And smarter is what areas of my body where's the flat tire? Where's the problem? Where's the kink in my armor? And as you fix those kinks, it then allows you to train effectively for something, said activity.
Got it.
But yeah, you don't know that until you've been exposed. So the whole point of a battery of tests is to expose you.
I mean, it's a good segue into what are we doing right now? So when you and I got to talking about this, how can we do better in a tactical environment? And how can I train if I want the benefits of my training to be at the range? And for your training at the range, how do I get my my blood pressure to the point where, or my heart rate to the point where I'm taking cleaner shots because I'm less exhausted? How do I get up and down off the ground easier? How do I kneel faster? How do I jump over walls using power, short bursts of power quicker? And when we got to talking about that, you said, hey, let's just start right now, get your baseline, and then let's work over the course of the next 6 months. And to anybody out there that's listening right now that's interested in doing this, we're going to document the entire thing. I'm going to document the entire process, and not to show you, hey, here, look what I can do. It's more of, look what we did for me and how it changed and how the particular workouts and the things that you did for me changed me and how you can do it too based on, the equipment that you have at home. What are your thoughts on that?
That's it. We draw a visual for everyone. It's a pyramid. And the pyramid looks as such where people are interested in their skill. I want to be able to shoot in this way. I want to be able to protect myself in this way. I want to be able to throw a ball. We serve a lot of athletes too. And so the top of the pyramid is your sports skill. And we all want to get better at that sports skill. The middle layer is doing the movement patterns that are regularly in that skill. So that would be, that'd be a lunge. That would be climbing up onto a wall. That would be working on a hard ruck. Okay, it's the training and a lot of the movement that allows you to do, that skill set, tactical work often. The bottom part of the layer is your foundational level. So that is your heart health. That is your joint and tissue health. That is what's the quality of your metabolic system? What's the cognitive ability of your memory and focus? What's your nutrition like? What's your sleep like? What's your sun exposure like? What's your hormonal profile like? So those foundational layers think of it like a 10x factor. When you go to sleep on time repeatedly, your hormonal profile improves. Your sympathetic and parasympathetic state improve. As those foundational layers of the human system improve, it then allows you to train at an extremely effective level. You're able to do the movement patterns that support your skill over and over and over, so that when you buy the right weapon, you focus on the scope, you're able to do that said thing at a precise level. But that foundational layer is usually undermined, where we all live in denial with what we should be eating and how we should be sleeping and how we should be, getting sun exposure or even like getting cold exposure. That's a common one too. We should be getting in the environment and experiencing the environment, and there's a lot of healthy things to that. But when we set that foundational layer, let's grade it. We can grade it by looking at your heart rate. We can grade it by looking at your body fat. We can grade it by looking at your movement health. How well can you touch toes? How well can the hand get in the small of your back? How well can your heel get to your butt? And then we start looking at strength, speed, power, stamina as our base rubric to accomplish special skill.
So do you think it'd be fair to say that if you saw somebody on a range and they went from taking a few shots, kneeling, running, taking another few shots, by the time they got to the end of the course and they were laying there and they were missing maybe the long range shots, you could walk up to that person and they could look up at you and say, I was slow, right? I was slow and I was not accurate. I'm not hitting my shots like I wanted to hit my shots. I'm not putting it in the A zone where I wanted to put it, and I wasn't getting from point A to point B as fast as I wanted to get. You would not look back at them knowing what you know and say, well, you just need to get out here and train on the range more.
Yeah.
You would probably look at them and say, well, you need to start eating better, get some fucking sleep. Right?
Your hip mobility is garbage.
Hip mobility is garbage, right? You're seeing things that are outside of just, I need to come down here and get more reps in, because that's, and it's slightly embarrassing, especially for our audience, because I just sit here and I go, more reps, range time, get more range time. Like if you're not hitting your target, get more reps in. But the reality is they may not be able to get to that last like 10% to 20% of perfection because they've got all these other things kind of holding them up. They may shoot 1,000 rounds a month. It's never going to get better unless you address those small things.
Well, it'll be limited. Maybe they get better, but it'll be limited, right? So that we look at the body as the weapon in our field, right? So it's like, can you get your body into a position to then execute, right? So whether it be an athlete or if you're in a tactical environment, can you get it where it's supposed to be, and then you can do the skill required, right? But if you can't get your body where it's supposed to be and it doesn't work for you, you get to your point, you could practice all day long. And like we talked about earlier, like when the environment changes, it's one thing if you're in a calm environment, staying on the range and no one's shooting back at you is certainly very different than if someone is.
But to put more color on that, when any tactical athlete says, okay, assume this shape and say like, I can get here. I can get to this position. I can get this position. Rest, you're full of shit. I can get here just fine. I'm going to ask, are you free in that position? Do you feel tissue restriction? Because if you're not free in that position, you cannot sustain shot after shot after shot. You cannot do it for 2 hours straight. You cannot repeat training if you don't have freedom there. Because what happens is your tissue fatigues, then you start seeing the hand shake. And then someone's saying like, why am I shaking? And you're saying, because it's difficult for you to be in that position. You lack either mobility, you lack tissue health, you lack stability, and you lack stamina with the stabilizers in that position. And then the next question they ask is, well, how do I train that? And I'm gonna say, I don't know unless you do a battery of tests. Because anyone that looks at someone's movement and says, oh, that's tight, they're full of shit. You cannot tell what's wrong with someone by looking at a gross movement pattern. Okay. Which means they
you have to isolate them, right?
You have to expose the problem, and just doing a global pattern doesn't expose the problem. This is everywhere in our industry when people say like, oh, I can't squat because my ankles are tight.
It's like going to a doctor and you're like, I got a cough. And he's like, oh, it's pneumonia.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
It's like,
so we have
what?
to expose it. That's why we have a battery of about like 30 tests, 10 of which are movement. We wouldn't have the battery if we could just look at someone's shooting and say, oh, you lack stamina, just do that over and over again.
Right.
It's not that simple, unfortunately.
With good endurance, heart health, essentially. I mean, you could say that bringing your heart rate down would obviously improve your accuracy. Like I understand
immensely.
Okay.
Yes.
And then bringing your heart rate down, second question, from a medical standpoint, because we all talk about putting rounds downrange, putting them in the other direction, but if you're sending rounds downrange, odds are you've got rounds coming at you as well. If you were to take a shot and you had good heart health and your heart rate was at a reasonable level, we talked about this a bit before the podcast, but just touch on this real quick. How much does it impact you if I got hit in the femoral and I'm bleeding out, I'm waiting to get TQ'd, or I'm waiting to put my own TQ on? Am I going to last longer? Am I going to survive longer with a shot like that if I have better heart health?
I'll let you take the second part on there. But we developed this training regimen and a certification process actually we use the kettlebell as the main implementing tool. And there's a lot of kettlebell training programs out there, and they're about like, can you do a certain exercise so many times in a certain period of time, right? It's kind of CrossFit stylish. And one of the manipulations we made to that, as opposed to like doing something like doing an overhead snatch, becomes there's high risk involved for like injury, and you may not have to take that risk on if you're not doing a lot of overhead stuff. But if you do a lot of overhead stuff, then the snatch is great. But if you're not used to being overhead And in the tactical role, you don't have to be overhead all that often. You're supposed to stay at shoulder height or below.
Yeah.
So we modified that certification and that testing to be like, can you do this certain amount of movement, and then can your heart rate recover and drop by a certain amount of beats in a certain period of time? So can you work really hard for 5 minutes, and then can you get your heart rate to drop by 40 beats in 2 minutes? Now, if that doesn't happen, then that tells us conditioning wise, you've got some room for improvement. Your aerobic system needs to help because you can't recover very well, which means that when you go to take the shot after taking a few deep breaths, it's still going to be pumping, it's still going to be beating, it's going to be hard to hold stable, it's going to be hard to focus. But if your aerobic metabolism is high and you have good training, like long distance training, and you're able to get your better oxygen system, you're sleeping well, those types of things, you're going to have the heart rate recoveries and drop really quickly, and therefore your effectiveness is going to be better, and you'll be able to get in that position sooner, the heart rate will drop, you'll be able to get what you need.
Yeah, so to simplify the whole cardio profile, we can simplify by looking at what's your resting heart rate, what's your training heart rate, how high can you get it, what does it look like after recovery, say 1-2 minutes of recovery, what do you look like? And with those 3 measures, we can get a pretty good idea of what your cardiorespiratory fitness is like, which means how good is your heart, but also how good are your lungs at bringing oxygen in. Those 2 systems then dictate your overall health. That is health with how you respond to stress, how you respond to injury, how you respond to a bullet wound. If your nutritional makeup sucks and you're carrying too much body fat and you haven't taken your heart rate to a high level in a while, that means your blood pressure tends to be high. That means if you get hit, your body's going to spew out more blood quicker because of that chronically high blood pressure. But probably more importantly, even if you put pressure on it and bandage it, your ability to heal is completely dependent on the mitochondrial density of that area and how well you can oxygenate that area and send platelets to coagulate that area and stop it. So your ability to deal with injury, inflammation, and heal thanks to growth factor and just general growth in that area is completely predicated on your aerobic health. It is your battery. It's your capacity to deal with stress and deal with injury. With blood, you neither want too thick nor too thin. Too thin happens when people take a lot of medication. Too thick is because they have too much sugar, carbohydrates, and the triglycerides thicken the blood. So you want the blood to be like a medium, liquid, but it has to be responsive. And a responsive blood system means that your liver, heart, and lungs all respond quickly upon the site of insult, such as like a bullet wound. So your ability to respond quick is regardless of whether or not it's it's a physical ailment or an injury, or it's a physical injury like a wound. And how you look at wound healing is dependent on how aerobic a cell is. It's an equal sign of wound healing, and everyone can improve it just by doing conditioning. That could be long, slow work like rucking and hiking and jogs and jump rope, or bike rides. And then we do a lactic aerobic work, which is taking a kettlebell, doing some swings and get-ups and push presses, which is what we're going to start in a few weeks.
You can only buy so many med kits, but you can go on plenty of 5K ruck marches, right?
Yes.
What do you do in a situation like Nolan has AIDS? So what do you do? What do you do in a situation where you have AIDS? No.
Just gonna tell my secret to the whole world like that?
And there it is. Do the white blood cell count actually play a role in your tactical? But we do only have probably another 15 minutes or so, 15 minutes or so, because I want to be respectful of your guys' time. We did have some questions from some of the guys in the Discord. We might only get to 1 or 2 of them, but I figured maybe we could ask.
One that actually came off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Sucks to suck, guys. Was what are some preventative measures for injury? Because that is the biggest thing. Like, as you guys are well aware in the sports sciences, and myself being injured plenty of times, injury takes you out more than anything you could expect. Like just little injuries too. Like your rotator cuff all of a sudden going out on you, or your lower back's pinching up, your knees are going out. So what are a couple things that the average guy can do for preventative measures as they're starting to get on kind of a fitness journey?
Let's separate it between tendon pathologies and ligaments. You take one.
Yeah, let me just, before you get there, let's talk about why injury happens, right? So there's the number one cause of injury is prior injury. All right. So if you've been hurt before, the chance of you getting hurt again is extremely high. Not necessarily in the same spot. All right. So what that means is that we probably don't really rehab that well from first injuries, right? So that's very, very important. If you have a history of some stuff, you got to get some shit cleaned up. Number two, the second highest cause of injury is fatigue. So we go right back to the conversation we just had about aerobic fitness. So if we can be aerobically fit and less fatigued, you're much less likely to hurt yourself. So if you want to rank things, those would be top on the list. If we talk about like, there's different kinds of injuries from like tendon injury, which would be considered overuse, which is a terrible term, but if you think about what the word is, it's overused. So it's used more than it's used to. All right. So someone could do a lot more than somebody else because they've trained for it, because that tissue is used to doing a lot of work. But if you're not used to doing that work and all of a sudden you increase it significantly, now all of a sudden you've overused it from what it's used to doing. And that creates an inflammatory process that happens around the tendon, which is like there's at the end of the muscle, the tendon is what attaches to the bone. So that gets pulled on a ton. And these tendons have huge amounts of adaptability. It's a really, really dynamic structure, too much to go into in detail, but it basically gets a bit inflamed. And then it's encapsulated so that synovial sheath gets a lot of fluid in it and it gets pissed off and that hurts.
Right.
And once that starts hurting, your muscle stops functioning. Basically, you can't make the same contraction you were able to make before, because now when you go to make a contraction, it hurts. And so your brain shuts it down, right? And then you start this process of getting weaker and less conditioned, and we're moving in the wrong direction, right? So then that's where you get into like, oh, should I rest? Should I not rest? And all that stuff. But basically, you get the inflammation back under control and then rebuild that tissue to tolerate the load. But that's any muscle tissue. So that's the rotator cuff, patella tendon, or like anterior knee pain, if people complain of anterior knee pain. Or as we get a little older, a lot of Achilles tendonitis is another big one, the back of the Achilles. That's oftentimes people blame that on running or walking or standing all the time. Same thing, those are all tendinopathies or tendon wear. That's usually started off by the tendon doing a little more than it's used to, getting into an inflammatory state, and then it just stays there because we're not reducing it. So the best thing you could do is don't make big jumps in your training. Don't make big jumps. Don't go from the couch to 5
To run in
days
a 5K.
week.
Yeah,
exactly. Have some progression. Be smart about your loading process and how you load the body and how much time you spend on it. And if you're going from a big obvious one would be like people wearing boots all the time and then going to like training in bare feet, or wearing sandals all day long. Like that little change is a lot of change on a tendon that's not used to that type of load.
Your tendons are well loaded with your.
Yes.
He operates in flip-flops.
Flip-flops and bare feet.
Literally 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Oh, there's more questions to answer here, but
There's literally a second
quick one
half.
about the flops. Is there a disadvantage? Is it more of a disadvantage or an advantage for him to be training in flip-flops on a regular basis?
I think it might be bad, but let's tease it out with good testing. Let's see if
Are you gonna
somehow
change
he's an adaptive athlete with their testing
Are you
batteries.
going to change your footwear at all throughout
Why
this
would I?
entire process? You're going to keep the flip-flops.
Yeah.
I think
That's
it's
awesome.
an advantage. I think it would be an advantage.
We're going to find out. The boots versus flip-flops. That's what we're going to call the next week's test.
Boots versus flops, dude. There it is.
Well,
Episode 2, boots versus flops.
So the other part, the devastating injuries tend to be ligamentous. So that's the shoulder dislocation. That's ripping your disc. That's tearing a ligament in your knee. That's an ankle sprain that's maybe so bad that the ankle dislocates or you need a surgery. So when people end up with a lot of these surgeries at the sports med injuries and you go to the orthopedist, it's because you blew a ligament. And I'd say there's a lot of reasons why, but probably one of the bigger reasons is because the person didn't have a musculotendinous system that dampened the force. So say you have law enforcement, they're training, in the academy, and they're told they got to climb this wall and jump over. When they land, if they don't have a good muscle system to dampen, that means ankle, knee, and hip needs to lower themselves, compress in a controlled fashion. Then if they can't do that, the ligament stress spikes. And we can see that, so we can actually test it. We'll test it on you guys to see how well you dampen the force. But if that impact spikes heavily, then you're basically you're stressing your ligaments past their capacity over and over and over. And you do that on the 10,000th time, ACL blows. And we tend to think of it like, oh, it was that one moment. And in reality, oftentimes people say like, I've done that moment a million times and it didn't do it. And if you inappropriately dampen force over and over and over, your ligaments tend to blow in your back, which is your disc herniating, in your shoulder when it dislocates, in your neck when the disc locates. So all these really severe ones that you make your way to the orthopedist, you could a lot of the time say it's because you didn't dampen the force correctly.
That's like what happens to a lot of airborne guys.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sure.
Yep.
Well, Or in states of fatigue. Oftentimes those are with trauma. But yeah, no, the airborne guys are huge. And like the rappelling stuff, if you're rappelling and coming off chopper, or if you're jumping out of a plane,
Hitting the
landing
ground
with a
hard.
chute, whatever, absolutely. I had a guy who was crazy coming off a chopper, and then he fell. He was in the first day. That was the drop-off point of a 6-week tour. He fell to the ground. The chopper to take off started taking fire, so he fell to the ground and smashed his disc.
Ooh.
His whole leg went numb
Damn.
while he's like laying there. And his team was with them, and they got him. And one of the most important medical needs in the teams is duct tape. So he's like, I put duct tape around my back, duct tape my hip, limped my ass into the jungle.
Exoskeleton.
Yeah.
And then I survived for the next 6 weeks. And that's what it takes to get in that situation. But I met him when he was in his 50s, and he still has the limp.
Still has it from that one operation.
Yeah, well, he didn't have the operation. Well, he had operation. Oh, from
No,
the
I
op.
meant
From the op.
combat
Yeah,
operation.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, from the op. It's amazing. But he blew the disc out, and then he went with very, very minimal medical care for 6 weeks. But he had to. There was no exit strategy.
There was no.
You're in.
There was only infill.
We're going.
There was no exfil. All right, on. Do we?
Well, I know some of those questions though.
Yeah.
When I read through them, a lot of them were asking, "Hey, what do I do for this shoulder pain? What do I do for this back pain?" So speaking of the tendinous injuries that Tony spoke of, we find that when you do slow tension exercises that exercise the exact area that got injured, it tends to help a lot. So there's a lot of research behind slow tension that might look like a 45 to 60 second exercise that might be quite simple. Maybe do like a 5-pound rotator cuff exercise, or you do a what's called the pale-off press and just do like these short rotations. So whenever you invoke a contraction at the exact muscle tendinous area that actually hurts and it's injured, and you do light exercise very slowly, and you might do like 5 sets of it. It's a very good strategy.
And if it hurts while you're doing it,
You do it.
You still do
You
it.
do it. Yeah.
Is it because
Load
it's so
appropriate.
right? Because it's so light and
Yeah. Yeah. You
So you
it's,
like
yeah.
hold a lateral raise for like a minute and a half. Hold a lunge position, like knee over the toe on your toes for a minute. Try to hold these difficult positions for long periods of time. It's going to help. It's going to help build tendon health, which speaks to another great question that was in there regarding, if they've been in powerlifting or like heavy weightlifting or bodybuilding for the time, and now they're moving more towards the tactical environment. What should they change? How should they change? And that's a big thing. Like those are great models for building what we call hypertrophy, or building muscle size and building weight, right? But as we talked about earlier, more weight's not exactly an advantage. And how strong do you really have to be? It's not about like brute strength of like moving 400 pounds.
right.
You got to maybe at worst you probably have to pick up a team member and throw them over your shoulder and carry them. But it's usually not, other than the routine weight you have, it's not a lot of heavy lifting.
Right.
It's about moving effectively and doing it consistently for long periods of time. So
That segues into this question pretty nicely, which is what kind of physical standards do you like to see people maintain? Like, when is enough enough?
Yeah, what's common for that is, how much should you squat? How much should you deadlift? What's a good per body weight ratio? So for a lot of MMA athletes, we do 2.5 times body weight for a dead. That's really common. A 2-time, this works well for men. So for men, a 2.5 dead, a 2 times for body weight, and a 1.5 times bench press yields a pretty good athletic base for most men. Women are going to have a similar need for their lower body, but their upper body won't be up to that standard. So usually for the women, it's a 2 times body weight deadlift, a 1.5 body weight for their squat. For the bench press, it's not as we don't focus on as much for females. We actually don't focus that much for males as well. It's kind of not in the battery that we're going to test you on. We're going to test you with more of an overhead pattern, because this is a little more of like a bench press, is a little more for linemen in football. But
you've been playing with this this one arm hang. I think is an interesting.
One arm hang is a great test. Yeah, because if you weigh a lot, then you can't do it.
Self-limited, which is a big thing in the tactical community. The first thing is, can you move your own body in a variety of ways?
Right.
If you can't own your own body, then extra weight is not the value.
Right.
And that's one of the biggest mistakes in bodybuilding, is that you lay on a bench and you bench, or you put a bar on your back and you squat, but half of them doing it in their own body look like shit. And so they miss the first parameter by just jumping to more load. And now
First parameter being form.
Yeah, form
Just
with
good
your own
form.
body weight.
Yeah.
Own
Operate
your
your
own
body
body
well.
weight. Yeah. Can you do a pistol squat? Can you go down on one leg, ass to grass, and then get back up?
It's amazing how everything circles right back to the mobility standard.
Yeah. Well, then people say, well, I can't do that because my ankle doesn't move well. And they use that as an excuse. See, I can't be strong because this area doesn't move well. Then help it move better. Put that as the focus. And so the whole battery is to expose how much movement issues do you have. And if you have movement issues, then do that and stop effing around. Stop living in denial.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Stop using a
trying
box to shorten your squat. Like just work on getting better.
That's really, really helpful. And we're about out of time, but we're going to do this again in a month.
Sounds good to me.
I think we should do this again in a month because I think there's so much that gets overlooked really in any industry. I don't care whether it's, in a particular field of sports or in the tactical, especially in the tactical industry. People think they just need to go out and shoot, but that's not necessarily the case. I think there's a lot more that we could do to get better and address those things. Having said that, just one question that I did want to ask that I can get, hopefully we could answer in the next 2 minutes, is if you were to hold a rifle from a standing position for an extended period of time, I mean, what things would you work on if I wanted to stand up and hold a rifle and be able to carry my rifle and be able to maintain target acquisition without my hands moving around all over the place? Are you talking about strength and endurance with, shoulder presses? What would you be working on maybe in the gym to be able to hold a pistol or a rifle for an extended period of time in one direction?
I mean, you definitely have to have stabilizing strength in your rotator cuff and in your delts and traps. But you only get the opportunity to train that at a really high level if your mid, back, and core work well. So just like every house, it is built off of a solid foundation. So if the hips and low back and mid back do their job correctly, it allows you to have great stabilizing stamina and to do that. So we can do different exercises like Turkish get-ups and kettlebell arm bars and slow tension raises and do those things to develop stamina in that area. That way a rifle is easy and you're able to do it for hours on end, but you only get that opportunity if the rest of the package is good.
So start with the core.
Yeah, if you have no equipment, I'd do like a one-arm plank. So, in a plank position, just one arm at a time. Try to hold that for a minute on each arm. That would get it going. Go in a lateral position, so you're sideways. Same thing, at least 30 seconds on each side.
Okay.
And then get some sort of a dumbbell or a kettlebell, at least 25 pounds, hopefully closer to 45, 50, and hold it overhead in a fully extended position.
Handstands.
Yeah, handstand.
Handstands,
And the safer version, hold it as long as you don't drop it on your head, but hold it straight overhead and look to walk with for a minute again. So you're building with the science behind holding it for a minute is really, really solid on activating mitochondrial activity and oxygen, aerobic health, as we've been talking about. So those are really, really good, easy, very, very low need, like low equipment needs. And then, of course, you can do like a lateral raise, or we call them letters, where you're doing like just a 3-pound weight, which would be maybe comparable to a gun, like a rifle or a pistol. That's even more. But holding it for, same thing, like a minute, can you hold the long duration positions? Because the muscle is going to fatigue out, and there's a total metabolism and there's a local metabolism. And when you fatigue out the muscle locally, you're starting to train that metabolism. You're changing those cells in that muscle to be able to tolerate those loads for periods of time. So if you plan on holding a position for a long period of time, then outside of just saying do it more,
Right.
the concept is hold something for a long period of time so you train that tissue to adapt.
And I'll say most civilians who work out in a gym and there's like a mirror there, we tend to like focus on the muscles we see.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You can always tell a strong athlete. All you have to do is have them turn around and see what their mid-back looks like,
Right.
see what their butt looks like. I know you look at a lot of butts, but if you do, if you see it in the butt and you see it in the mid-back, you're looking at an athlete.
That's an awkward
It's-
time with
it's
the trainer.
not-
I know we just met, but let me see that ass.
I'm going to need you to turn around.
That's usually what they're there for.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right. So if anybody in the audience wants to get a little more, just to set expectations, when you, on your podcast, the Kimecast, you guys get really in depth, I'm assuming, in the science of things. So if you're interested in that, right, you're less tactical and more.
Well, general performance enhancement for sure. Yeah, like how do you combat injuries? How do you how do you increase performance, et cetera, for sure.
Okay, right on. Sounds
And then
good.
for our guys, if you want to learn about guns, shooting skills,
Right. We talk a lot about the Constitution. We talk a lot about just individual freedoms and
General debauchery.
general debauchery. don't watch it in the same room as your children. Like, don't have you know what I mean?
For sure.
Make sure you're not connected to Bluetooth in the other room accidentally, because usually the worst stuff comes out in the first 30 seconds.
That's true. That's also true. We like to have fun here.
We do. We like to have fun, but yeah, just general, training techniques, Second Amendment, and just overall, just being an American and what it means.
Trying to be a better human.
Just trying to be a better human overall.
Love it.